Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, your go-to source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We hope you tune in often for all things people management, organizational development and change, organizational leadership, and social impact related. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI podcast episode, I talk with Dr. Eric Russell, HCI Research Associate, about humility, servant leadership, and effective and successful organizational leadership. Eric Russell, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Eric, you and I go way back. It's been fun working with you in a variety of capacities over the last decade, and I've really enjoyed your contributions to the podcast to date. You shared several of your own insights in shorter episodes, and it's fun to have the opportunity this week to sit down and have a discussion with you on a topic that I know is near and dear to both of our hearts as we talk about the role of humility and leadership and leading people in organizations. Before we get started, though, I want to make sure that everyone has a chance to get to know you a little bit. Eric is a professor of emergency services at Utah Valley University. He's a research associate at Human Capital Innovations. Eric, anything you would like to share with the listeners?
Probably about the work that I do with servant leadership, the writing and the research. A lot of it is so grounded in humility, and I think it's a big deal. I'm excited that, we're going to be talking about that today, and just the role that humility plays in leadership, as well as in the leader-follower relationship as well. So I'm excited to start bringing it to life in this format. I think HCI is a great way to do it. And we know a lot about it. We've dialogued about it. We've definitely been humbled in our careers, and we know the role that it plays.
Yeah. And I should share with the listeners too. Eric and I both strongly believe in servant leadership. We're both members of the Greenleaf Center of Servant Leadership. And that framework provides the guiding principles for how we think about leadership generally. But a core piece of that is humility, and which is counterintuitive to a lot of leaders, a lot of the style of a lot of leaders. And so over the years, we have talked about this a lot. We've presented together at conferences on this, these types of topics. And it's something, even when we're just commiserating and kind of mumbling and grumbling about, what we're seeing in the world or seeing at our, organization, our institution in terms of what leaders are doing, it often comes back to this topic. So it's a super important one. And I hope that everyone will carefully consider their own leadership style and approach and how humility may or may not fit into it, but also think about how it fits into their own organization, where they work, and the people they report to, and if there's any opportunities for improvement in either of those situations.
That's good.
Yeah, well, as we start things off today, Eric, do you want to just provide a brief kind of introduction and overview to servant leadership generally? And then we can start to dig into humility more specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. So the philosophy of servant leadership turned 50 this year. It came from Robert Greenleaf, who penned the essay, The Servant as Leader. And he started the Center of Ethics in Indianapolis, which then became the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership. Several years ago, it moved down to Atlanta, and now its permanent home is at Seton Hall University. But that's where like all of his archived papers are and everything's there. That's where the center will remain now. it wanted to have an academic home. But Greenleaf was a very successful, very popular manager with AT&T and management executive trainer. He was who people like. He was friends with Franklin Covey and Peter Drucker and all those people. They bantered back and forth a lot, and sometimes they would just sit in quiet because Greenleaf was a Quaker. But they would spend time with him because his entire philosophy of leadership was completely different. Like you said, the issue with leadership, it's that great man theory. And we've dispelled this in research and business and leadership research and management research and writings. We've dispelled it over the years. Like, it's not true. You're not born a leader. That it's just a pile of crap. But it just seems to be the easiest thing to grab onto. Is this leader is this predominantly male, large, this natural born leader that's up there on the hill, some John Wayne character. And Greenleaf looked at a lot of this stuff and was like, well, the organization's a toxic. And so he was like, there's got to be a better way. And because he studied Eastern philosophy and he was a Quaker, and he just realized that there was a better way of leading people. And from reading Hermann Hesse, The Journey to the East and stuff like that, he had the vision of servant leadership, and then he put it down, and it's grown like wildfire. It's probably the most sought after leadership philosophy that's out there. And it's because after a while, you just realize that you can't become a transformational leader. You can't become an LMX leader or a situational leader, but you can be a servant leader. Servant leadership is about being. And in order to change the culture and change the organizations to be places where people aren't, fleeing for their lives, you have to have a place where the leader, it's part of their being, it's part of who they are. And so it's just taken off.
Yeah, it's a very popular theory, but it's on both ends. It's popular by those who adhere to the philosophy, like you and I, but it's also a popular punching bag by others who just think it's nonsense. It's fluffy nonsense.
Yeah.
And more so than any other leadership theory that I really am aware of, like transformational or situational leadership, people say, yeah, that makes sense, or I see how that applies to the situation. It seems like people either love or hate servant leadership. And I think the reason why people hate it is because it's just so contradictory to their own style. If it's completely antithetical to who they are as people and as leaders, then I understand why they would, call it nonsense. But there's so much research to support the idea of how to create a healthy and dynamic, innovative organization. And you don't do that through autocratic leadership, right? And so you need people that have a level of intellectual humility about them, who are willing to seek input from others, like genuinely seek input and implement input from others into their decision making. And that's just not that alpha male type of model of leadership that was very dominant even a few decades ago.
Right. So I say in a lot of the work that we do, and I've published stuff on this, like servant leadership cycle of benefit. We did research about the personal benefits to being a servant leader. My biggest critique of servant leadership is those of us that write and speak on this stuff, because a lot of the writings leave it as that ice cream for breakfast. It just does. It leaves it at the top. There's way too much religiosity that's attached to it. The way that you read it, it talks about second place finishing, and none of it's true. But in order to have that poetic, philosophical way of speaking and writing, you come up with this stuff, but it's just not true. A servant leader is a nightmare to work for, because a servant leader is going to hold you to standards that you didn't think that you could ever reach, because the servant leader is committed to the growth of the individual. You think of the three pragmatic questions that Greenleaf asked. Well, one of them is, do your people grow? Well, your people don't grow if you allow them to just lay on the couch and eat cupcakes. Your people grow because you push them. Your people grow because you hold them to standards that they can be better tomorrow than they were yesterday. but servant leadership literature, a lot of times, and again, it's beautiful to read, but in an alpha culture, the world that I come from, the world that I write to a lot, the reason I get pushback is because it is an alpha culture. And they're like, what is this? It's fluffy. But when you really get down into the heart of what it means, and then you extrapolate the characteristics, the constructs, the attributes, like humility, like we're going to talk about, it starts to make sense. And they're like, oh, okay, I get it. To where servant leadership, it's not self-sacrificing, and you're not a second place finisher. The truth is being a servant leader is a rational, selfish decision, because once you understand the tangible and intangible benefits that come to you by making sure your people flourish and grow so they become innovative and creative and can be empowered, well, you benefit. You make more money. And when we look at the corporations that are out there, I mean, you look no further than Alphabet stock, look no further than Google. Google is a servant leadership organization. They take care of everything from your dry cleaning to your children's daycare, you name it. They pick you up in a limo bus and they pay you a ton of money. Like, Google understood, if we can take care of those first 4 steps in the hierarchy of needs, it's going to be quicker for you to self-actualize. And as soon as you self-actualize, you start creating apps and our stock goes over $1,000.
Yeah, well, and I think of like companies like Google or Twitter or Qualtrics, you know, some of these tech companies that have already announced,
Yep.
They've already announced that coming out of this COVID pandemic, they're allowing people to continue to work from home, at least through the end of the year, if not for forever.
Yep.
And what that demonstrates to me is not only do they trust their people and they recognize the value of the technology that can be utilized so people can work, you know, effectively remotely, but it's inherently a people-centric organization when they take that approach, as opposed to other organizations that are trying to get their people back into the workplace as soon as possible, because they don't trust them, because they just assume that people are sitting at home not doing anything. And it's a completely different mentality to how we approach our people. And I agree with you. I see companies like Google they're an employee-centric organization because they know a people-centric approach in the workplace leads to a people-centric approach out of the workplace, which means better products and services for consumers, which means more sales, more profits, everyone benefits, right?
Yep, absolutely. And when you understand that, you dominate. You know, I love Conley's book, Peak, where you see how you get people to the peak where they can perform at that high level of creativity and innovation and all of that kind of stuff. Well, if you look at who's successful right now and you look at what companies are just continuing to blow up, it's companies that have adopted that philosophy. But you have to, at the heart of what Greenleaf was saying is when you meet the needs of your people, they can flourish. And it's also one of the reasons why these companies pay so well compared to other businesses. You know, if your people are getting off shift at your place from their full-time job and they got to go work a second shift at a local Stop and Rob just to keep the lights on, you're not getting the best of those people. They're not continuing to go to school. They're not growing. They're not spending time in meditation and thought and coming up with new ideas to go into the office tomorrow or get on a Zoom meeting and be like, hey, I just came up with this. We can turn this into something. This is going to make a lot of money. It's like, no, I'm exhausted. I have 2 kids and I can barely keep my head above water. Tech, for some reason, understands it. Tech gets it better than just about any industry that I've ever dealt with, and dealing with tech leaders is different than dealing with, say, financial leaders. When I've worked with some people that have worked in finance and coached them, they don't understand that when your people are inventive and they're creative and they're also, they feel free to go out there and take risks because they know you got their back. And their risk would never have like malice behind it, but they're going to take risk and they're going to take chances. You just see these companies get better and better and better. Whereas other organizations that don't do it, they circle the drain. The stock goes down or whatever, and they're miserable companies to work for.
Yeah. I wrote a recent article on the cost of toxic leadership. You may be familiar with the total cost of assholes and the no asshole rule. So that's what I was referring to. And the bottom line is it's incredibly costly to organizations, but it's kind of the typical model, right?
Uh-huh.
The traditional model of leadership is towards that, and people get promoted generally in the traditional hierarchical structure because they're that type of leader that ends up, that's assertive, that is willing to step on people while they climb the ladder, and they end up finding themselves in positions of leadership. To tremendous negative detriment of the organization and the people that they impact and influence. So what we're talking about today is kind of the complete opposite of that, right? Like, instead of that toxic leader who is a bullier, who takes advantage of people, who steps on people, who's 100% self-interested to the point where they don't really care about developing their people, right?
Yeah.
Which by the way is short-sighted, but that's their mentality. What we're talking about is the opposite. We want humility. We want someone who can recognize their limitations, surround themselves with good people, and collaborate and work collectively to bring about good results for the organization. Humility, not in the sense of they're completely submissive and passive and a doormat that people can walk all over. That's not what we mean.
No, not at all.
But someone who's not so stuck up on their own abilities and knowledge, thinking they have all the answers, and they're willing to lean on other people.
Yeah, because when you listen to a lot of the successful, I would say the real leadership voices right now, the far more popular ones with great book sales and years of experience, not people that are just full of crap and pulling it out of their backside. You listen to like Jocko Willink, who was a SEAL team commander, who was like, you either need to learn humility or you're going to be humbled. You learn to somebody like Tony Robbins, who's responsible for, I don't know how many people getting B's in front of their name, and he's like, the true leader is a servant leader. It's that I don't understand why in the high speed, low drag corporate world that they just don't get this. They don't understand. And then they're like, well, why isn't our company growing? Why are we constantly at threat of being taken over? Why do we constantly see our people leaving? Our retention rate sucks. But when you go to these corporations and stuff like that where there is humility, where there is servant leadership, where there is trust, and it's not being a doormat. Like, that's the worst thing. Nobody wants a doormat for a leader. But what we think is you're either a doormat or you're an asshole. And they're not the same. These aren't your only two choices, right? So, like, I have a small chapbook. I had a independent publishing company put out a small chapbook that I wrote that was kind of not mainstream, but it's called Servant Leadership for the Asshole Within. And it allows you to, and it's just an ebook that you can get on Amazon, I think for free now, but it allows you to look inside at these different little bad behaviors, these little noxious, toxic things that we do. And it just makes work suck. I mean, you think how many hours a day you spend working and how many hours it's hard enough as it is. Life is hard enough as it is. And having that toxic leadership and that toxic management, it's like having people just continuously put weights in your backpack as you're trying to hike. It's like, dude, I can make it to the top of the mountain. I'll get us up there, but you keep just throwing weights in my backpack. So humility is more along the lines of, well, I'm going to make sure those weights on it. I know how hard you're working. I get it. And I'm going to keep it in check. I'm going to keep my ego in check with you. And I'm going to help you get there. I'm also going to try to remove some of these weights. And the weights are usually like corporate bureaucracy and the issues that exist within corporations. Like, I love to hear the argument of, well, government's all bureaucracy and it's full of toxic bureaucracy and bureaucrats. It's like, so's corporate culture. And humility is, like you said, these tech corporations are trusting their people to work from home. Well, that's humility, because what they're saying is, the thing that we thought before, we had to have this, $250 million office tower which I still think they need to exist just because I love cities, our people don't need to be there all the time. And that humility is they just literally admitted, hey, we thought differently. And now we're realizing as tech people that there are just as effective, if not more effective, alternative ways to do things.
Yep.
And when you look at like special forces, you look at the military, you look at fire and rescue, your people, once they've been in the career for a long time, they're like, yeah, you need to be a little humble with people. You need to keep your ego in check. You know, situations, especially when you talk about violence, you want to start watching the escalation of violence, have a little bit of a lack of humility and have a toxic ego at the same time. And you're going to go hands-on with people and it's not going to be good.
So, and I agree with all of that. I'm wondering, why do you think it's so pervasive within organizations to have an ego-dominated leader as opposed to a leader who has at least some semblance of intellectual humility and is willing to approach his or her people with that trust and that humility?
That's a good question. One, it needs to be said that ego matters. It really does. It's the ego that gets somebody to actually want to do something. So to deny ego, I think, is a problem, and ego matters. The problem with ego is when you think it's what matters and it's not in check. That's the difference. And there's a difference between ego is, I want to become great at something. I want to learn this. I want to build a business, or, you know, I want to join the Marine Corps and become like an MSOC raider or something. Like I want to reach the peak of something. That's ego. That's drive. And that is part of a person's greatness, is their ego. But it's not their leadership. And what we've done is we've taken it. It's like that idea of, well, this person's the best at digging holes, so therefore they'd be the best at leading people at digging holes. Like, it's not, we miss the point that ego matters as far as your drive and what you can become and what you want to achieve. But ego is toxic when it comes to relationships with people. But because it's so successful when it comes to achievement, we're like, well, oh hell, we'll just employ this when it comes to people as well, because it's just the easiest thing. Again, we've just circled back to that whole idea of great man theory.
Yeah.
I just think that we mistake it. I also think that in some circles and in some leadership circles, we play down the role of ego. But I do believe Rand was right. I do. I believe that ego matters. I believe that ego is the driving factor for you to want to be greater than where you are today. Your ego is a good thing, but your ego and leadership don't belong in the same field. It's just, oh, well, this worked to help me build my business and get it successful. And now that I have employees, I'm just going to have my ego out there when I deal with them as well. And so sometimes we mistake ego for arrogance too. And arrogance sucks. I like cocky. I really do. I come from a world where if you're mousy or meek, you are not making me comfortable right now. So I need a little bit of cocky, and I need a lot of confidence. But arrogance just doesn't fit. It doesn't work. And arrogance and ego, those things, when they're brought into the leadership realm and how you interact with people, humility can't even exist at that point, because it keeps you from saying, you know what, I was wrong, or I screwed up, or your idea is way better. We're going to run with your plan instead of mine.
And giving them full credit for their idea, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like if you are a leader and you're the one, and I watched this. I watched a command level chief get all of these awards one time, and I watched his team that was specifically assigned it was his people. They all sat there and watched it. And my thing is, if you're the leader getting all of these accolades and all of these awards, and your people are sitting there watching you, that you screwed up. It is about making it about them, because you're winning. You're getting paid the most money. You have the say. If you want to make a tea time, you can, and your people aren't like, what a jerk, he's going golfing. No, because they know you love their success. You champion their success. You reward their success. You don't have to be the one that everybody else is saying, you did such a good job at being a leader. If you're getting all of these compliments and accolades as a leader and your people are watching you get them, nope.
Yeah, it reminds me of a Korean proverb. I lived for several years in South Korea. So I love the language. I love the people and the culture. And I learned a lot of these proverbs, a lot of them based on Buddhist or Confucius teachings. This particular one that's always stuck with me is chulam jie, which means bluer than indigo. So we think of indigo as the bluest of blues. And within the Asian culture, the teacher is indigo. The teacher is indigo, and their sole purpose is to help everyone around them to develop into something that is bluer than indigo, something that's greater than themselves. And
Absolutely.
so that's the philosophy I try to bring into my teaching and into my leadership, that the mark of a truly successful teacher or a truly successful leader is that all the people I help strengthen and benefit everyone around me, that everyone around me develops and becomes greater than I could ever be, right? Not just collectively, but like individually, like they are all very successful people. That's the mark of a great leader. That's the mark of a great teacher. And I've been modestly successful in my life. The true mark of my success in the long run, I would see as how many of my students have found great success in their professional lives and in their personal lives. How many of the organizations that I've worked with and the leaders I've worked with have found success, and how many of the people that I lead have expanded their potential because of how I've supported them.
Absolutely. That is the measurement. You want to be able to have a lot of pride as you see how successful your people become. I think all of my people are officers now. They've all been successful. They're successful in life. They're successful in their relationships. They're successful professionally. They have these, I don't know, they're just doing, and they say that, that's like the best compliment is like, you taught me this or you changed that. But I also got checked too. I had some of my favorite people after a couple of drinks when everybody's loosened up go, you know what? There were times you were a nightmare. And that was one of the things that servant leadership did for me, because I really didn't get into the philosophy until after I retired. And servant leadership became a mirror. It became a mirror for how good I could be, and it became a mirror of how good other leaders were, and it also became a mirror for me of there were times that I was a nightmare, and I was a nasty officer because I lacked compassion. I lacked the concept of humility, and I had to learn that. And it was one of my good friends now, but was also one of my young assignments, was like, you there were times you were a nightmare to work for. And looking back on that, I was. And I don't want people to be that way. I want them to learn from the mistakes that I made. I'm not saying that I was this like abusive monster, but there was an old saying that I had more words than you did tears. I could take a coffee break and come back and continue to chew your ass. And that just wasn't a good way to be. It wasn't a healthy way to be. I got these people working for me that are literally going to put their lives on the line. And they do constantly with me.
Yeah.
And I just wasn't good to them. And being, not all the time, just every once in a while it was. And I recognize that. I recognize that my ego, my arrogance, I was lacking of humility. I wasn't being that indigo teacher. I love that. And I always was like, well, I want my people to be better than I am. I want them to be stronger than I am. I want them to achieve more than I have. And professionally, a lot of them have. It's the way to be. And if you want to find happiness, like Adam Smith said, sometimes you just find happiness in the success of others.
Yeah. I think about, the question earlier, why is this so prevalent of a problem within organizations, the arrogance of leaders and the lack of humility? And I mean, some of it's just inertia. It's just the way organizations have traditionally been. It's hard to change that culture. Some of it, and just the mindset of both the leader and the follower, the employee. A lot of employees think that's successful leadership. That's all they've known, and so they kind of expect that from their leaders. But I think a lot of it also comes back to the sycophant syndrome and the bootlickers and the suck ups. Every leader tends to attract those types of people, and some leaders thrive on that type of person. And so I think whether you're an arrogant leader who drinks the Kool-Aid and actually believes you're the greatest thing since sliced bread, or if you actually have more humility, those types of people are going to flock towards you, and you have to find a way to keep yourself in check, and you have to find a way to make sure that you're connected to reality and you're connected to the actual truth of your behavior and the implications of what you're doing as a leader. Because if you're surrounded by yes men, they're just going to tell you everything you're doing is great and all your ideas are great, and that's going to feed into your ego, into your arrogance. And a lot of leaders do surround themselves with those people on purpose, because they're insecure and they need to feel that validation on a regular basis. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, because it feels good, right? I had a friend of mine once. She ran a charity of this, like, I don't want us to get sued, so she ran a charity of this very, very famous, very wealthy individual who was one of those people, and still is, because he's alive, recognized on like every continent and any like this individual can't go anywhere and not have people just totally recognize him. The thing she said to me, because I was like, well, what was it like being around him? And she's like, it was like being around a God. And I was like, what? And she said, it was like being around a God because everybody who's around him treats him like a deity. And what happens with a lot of people who are leaders is they get treated like gods. And that's what sycophants are, is you're always right. It's great. But what leaders don't understand, and this is the best part, is the sycophant wants you to fall off the cliff. They're not going to tell you that next step is 1,000 feet down, because if you die, they get to move into your spot. Sycophants will always, like Mr. Smithers from The Simpsons, would be that way whether or not they were with this individual or the next one, because they know that they just continue to move up. And whether or not you go off the cliff, you go over the waterfall, they're not going to tell you there's a waterfall up ahead. They're going to tell you you're the greatest, because as soon as they fall, they get to move on. It's like a remora, okay? If a great white shark dies, a bunch of orcas kill the great white shark, the remora don't give a damn. They just go find another shark and suck off of that one. That's the thing, is when you surround yourself with sycophants, you're not surrounding yourself with loyal people, but they'll never disagree with you in public either. That's another thing. And I see that a lot in our media today. It's like, well, tell me how much your boss sucks. It's like, no, that is the most childish answer. And anybody who has any success whatsoever knows damn well that you do not disagree with your leaders in public, but you do in private. And you talk to them in private, and you're open and honest with them. And so as a leader, if you really want to be successful and you want your people to say, hey, there's a cliff you're going to go off of, then you can't surround yourself with sycophants. You have to surround yourself with people that have the courage to tell truth to power. But you have to be humble enough to do that too. Because like you were saying, when you're surrounded by people who are kissing ass, you really don't have to answer to anything in that moment, because everything you do is right. Your decisions are fantastic. You're the greatest, all this kind of crap. But eventually you're going to fail, and you're going to fail miserably, because you surrounded yourself with people that aren't going to tell you the truth. They're not going to make you better. And that brings us, not to go all the way back to this, but that really brings us back to the whole concept of servant leadership and servant followership. Is a servant leader is committed to the growth of people, and the servant follower is committed to the growth of their leaders. It's a cycle. And so you want your leaders to be better. You want them to grow, and you want your followers to be better, and you want them to grow. And that cycle has to exist. But if your leaders are just toxic and spinning their wheels, and really, what are you going to get out of that? If you surrounded yourself with a bunch of sycophants, you surrounded yourself with people that are just going to eat your corpse. I think that's what it is. They're going to eat your corpse. Nobody gives a damn. I can't remember
because they, whether they want to move into your position if and when you fall. Some want that. Others simply, once you're gone, they're just going to go after the next best bet, right?
Right.
So if they see the political winds changing and they think that you're in danger, they're going to go behind what they think the next best bet is, and they're going to get behind that person. So there's no loyalty to you, even though face to face they'll say you're the greatest thing ever.
Yeah. You meet people that work for nonprofits, and they're usually very well educated, especially people mid-level and even that are close to running the show, top schools, graduate degrees, and they're paid like crap. But they work within an organization and a culture that's just so positive, and they're just happy to be there. And these are people that can go make 2-3 times what they're making, but they don't want to go into that toxic area. They're not willing to just latch on to the next thing, because that's a problem. Like, if you're just doing that, having all of these decades behind me now to see what life is really about, if you're just attaching yourself to something because you're just going to make a bunch of money, you're going to be miserable. I mean, in the end, because once you get that money, you just want more. And once you get that success, you just want more. Once you get that power, you just want more. Like, there's nothing else there. You're not growing. You're just trying to achieve these very superficial things. And that's what surrounding yourself with sycophants is all about. They're going to let you fail, and they're not loyal to you. They're that remora. They don't care that the orcas kill the great white. They just go and find the next great white. They don't care. But that loyal culture where the leader and the follower are better, there's some humility. You can admit when you're wrong. You want to hear the truth. Like, why wouldn't you want to know the truth? If I wrote something and I sent it to my editor, and my editor was like, this is the greatest thing, and they publish it and it's just crap, well, that comes back on me, right? That makes me look like an idiot. But my editor gets to put a book out there, and they get to sell it to all these libraries and everything, and they make a ton of money.
Absolutely. Well, I think that you said it well as you were kind of pulling that all together. I know we're about out of time. Perhaps we can finish things off for today. I mean, this is a discussion that could go on and on and on, and we've really only scratched the surface in terms of talking about the role of humility as it connects with servant leadership and how it can manifest itself within organizations. Any final thoughts, any final word on the role of humility? And then we can continue this discussion soon.
Yeah. So just a couple things with, Greenleaf, when he said the ability to accept gratefully, generously, the ability to accept generously. When somebody gives you a compliment and it's a genuine compliment, and you just kind of just check it off because it makes us uncomfortable, or I think that always sticks in my head, is be able to accept generously. And the other thing is just study a little Stoicism. Study a little Epictetus. Read the Enchiridion. It's free. You can download it. It's online. Just learn a little bit of Stoicism. Learn the humility and learn the courage and learn the wisdom. It's the AA prayer that for Alcoholics Anonymous. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's humility. Surround yourself with people that are better than you. That's humility.
Yep.
Don't try to be the best. Don't try to be the best B player. When you want to have an A game, surround yourself with people that are A game players and that are going to push you. And that humility will get you a long way. And when you recruit people in, recruit people who are better than you. Recruit people that have strengths that you don't, that can complement you.
Well, and maybe that's a great way to end this. I love that idea. And as you were saying that, it just reminded me that humility is not weak. It's not being insecure. It's not submissive. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Someone who's humble, who's a leader, has a heightened sense of confidence. They're incredibly secure with themselves, because it's the insecure leader who doesn't want to surround themselves with people who are better than them, or they don't want to invest in their people to help them become better than them because they're worried about their power, right? But the secured leader can trust. They can exercise humility. They can seek out the best input. They can surround themselves with the best people, and they can support their people and help their people grow. That is strength. That is confidence, right? I think that's what it comes down to.
I agree. Well said.
All right. Well, Eric, it has been an absolute pleasure to talk with you. I hope we can do this often, because it's always fun chatting about these types of topics. I encourage listeners to check out Eric. Eric's not a social media guy, so you can't find him on LinkedIn. But he has a profile, a professional profile at the UVU website. You can look him up there, reach out to him. You can connect with him through the HCI website as well. Thank you, Eric. I hope you and your wife stay healthy and safe, and that you have a great rest of your week.
Same to you. Great talking to you.
Bye.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe, and that you have a great week. Check out our new weekly LinkedIn newsletter, Alchemizing Human Capital, exploring industry trends via original research and interviews with executives and thought leaders from across the globe. We look forward to having you join us.